Fantastic. And thank you all for joining us today. I can see that the attendees room is filling up. We've had over 60 registrations for this webinar today. So really obviously aiming to stimulate some discussion, get some good questions, and really obviously share sort of some insights that we're seeing. And as I say, most importantly, really keen to hear obviously audience thoughts. Just to introduce things today, so obviously topic for today are the current data and insights that we're using as an industry driving a poor customer experience. Just for my background, so my name's Liam. I own and operate Rextro. It's an online platform that's used by the majority of clinics around the country in order to set up their customer preferences around their face-to-face interactions. Joining me is Bryn, Managing Director of Ausdoc. Welcome, Bryn.
Thank you, Liam. Yeah, so Managing Director of Ausdoc. Fascinated by the topic, mainly because, when we talk about the customer satisfaction, doctors are our customers. They're everyone's customer, but they're the kind of our lifeblood. We do a lot of work with them. Obviously, we're in the business of trying to help doctors be better doctors. So yeah, that kind of that provision of timely information. What's the delivery mechanism? How do you make it always on? In an increasingly digital world. How do we better satisfy the needs of our customers, being doctors? So, thanks for the invite, Liam. And great to virtually meet everyone that's on the attendee list. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, look, just to jump into things, I'm just going to share my screen. Just to jump into things, essentially the context for today, we ran a webinar around 4 to 6 weeks ago, and look, we were joined by a couple of owners of GP practices that represented around 5% or 1 in 20 doctors nationally. There was a lot of really interesting insights discussed, things such as telehealth and a doctor sitting in Sydney doing consults with somebody in Orange or regional Victoria. But one of the things that came through and was sort of published the following week was probably the biggest insight that was relevant for pharma, and it was that one of the owners was talking about the overload that they receive from the pharma industry. It was interesting sort of during the webinar. It was something that personally I was disappointed with in terms of that feedback from the customers. I think that pharma plays a vital role to the industry. And when I look at the innovations that have come about, certainly in the 20 years that I've been involved, really kind of my goal is that pharma is perceived by the customer as a trusted partner in obviously the commercialization of these things. When I look at the challenges and sort of when the doctor was talking about the same rep being in there 8 times with the same product, there's a couple of sort of things that came to my mind that were quite interesting. And one of them was that I know exactly why that rep is in there over and over again. And I've been that rep that is doing those calls. But what was also really interesting was that as a sort of summary, we often see that the industry is quite patient focused and probably at times lacking in sort of a customer focused attitude. So it's not about sort of global and regional mandates. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, being patient focused is also about being focused on that doctor that essentially is obviously dealing with that patient. We combine this with the other sort of insight and where with digital initiatives, not only is this doctor experiencing sort of overload, but generally sort of 80 to 85% of the market are non-targets and not hearing anything about the product. We sort of see it as a bit of a limitation on a lot of digital initiatives overall. So really kind of objective for today to really break down this customer insight and go, why is this occurring? And is this still a sustainable model? And is this something that we should be looking to going forward?
I think just to add to that as well, and appreciate that, is Ausdoc's actually releasing a white paper next week, and it's about the kind of post-COVID digital potential digital overload as well. So again, that kind of, we're trying to empower doctors to be able to reach out and connect with the right people, get the right information at the right time. you know, everyone knows that during that COVID period, everything went digital pretty quick. You know, our digital consumption, everyone's digital consumption went through the roof. But when you actually look at that kind of individual doctor experience, you know, they went from sort of five, let's call them trade emails a week to more like 50, you know, and each and every brand was doing the correct amount of omni-channel and therefore managing that customer experience just perfectly. But, you know, when you go and add another 30 companies around it, that kind of was a bit of an issue as well. So I think it's a really an interesting and valid point. I think we all experienced. I know over Christmas I basically deleted my Gmail account because I was fed up of getting bombarded by so many emails offering me amazing deals. But yeah, I think it's that kind of what does normal look like now, you know, and how do we better look after doctors as that kind of frontline group.
One of the things I also missed just at the start is that on your Zoom functionality, you'll see there's a button there for Q&A. If people have questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to pop them in and we'll address them as we sort of go forward. So when we look at the current model that we apply, it's an interesting model because it's very different to every single other industry in the market. We often hear that sort of, you know, when people sort of first come into pharma, it's, these people haven't worked in pharma or they don't know pharma. And it's because it's built around this go-to-market strategy, where fundamentally we go and we seek as much data and insight as possible around the customer. We then assess based on the forecast how much resource we have to allocate to it. And fundamentally what we're looking to do is focusing that resource on the top. These days it can be as small as the top 5% of total prescription volume prescribers. So it means that in a go-to-market strategy, we're focusing on that top area and so forth, different to every other industry in the world. Now, when we have to understand why pharmaceuticals are different, we really need to go back into kind of the evolution of how this model evolved. And it is quite an interesting story in that it goes right back to the 50s. The first national audits data was published. It was published by a company called IMS Health that was actually set up by the Sackler brothers and another business associate in 1957. Interestingly, they were also the owners and operators of a marketing agency at the time, and really the view was to sort of set up the first sort of evidence-based marketing. So they went out and took a sample of 750 pharmacies in the US. They looked to establish a national benchmark of really the sales of product X compared to product Y. And this is obviously called the national audits data. What we saw was that in the 80s, there was a lot more improvement in just computing power and database capacity. So we saw that instead of compiling what was typically the accounting ledgers in the 60s, this moved to database extracts, even sent in via floppy disk back in the day. And really what this allowed to do was the first ever doctor level data. So this was identifying that this particular person is a really key customer for this market of products or for this product or so forth. One of the pioneers in this field was obviously Purdue Pharmaceuticals in the promotion of OxyContin, and effectively it definitely, based on history, has proved to be very effective in terms of understanding the market. It's also important that we sort of understand what this data is and where it comes from. So essentially the way the data is collected is that a patient goes and sees a doctor and the doctor writes a script for that product. The patient takes the script to the pharmacy, who then dispenses it, and then the pharmacy sells the details of that transaction off to the data mining companies. The information that's included in the script, there's an encrypted unique identifier for the patient. And what this does is it allows data mining to understand Is this a new initiation? Is this a continuation? Was this written by a GP and so forth? Is this patient switching to another product? It allows all that sort of analysis. The second element is obviously the individual doctor that prescribes it, which drives this targeting model and drives this understanding of exactly who are the top prescribers compared to who aren't. And finally, obviously, includes the SKU that's dispensed. It's rolled up into geographic information. And just to give you an idea of the scale of some of the databases that exists, the claims are that there's up to 1.2 billion unique patient identifiers, which represents 15% of the global database. So everybody on this call would be included in the database in some format, and essentially when you fill that script, that's obviously recorded. What's really interesting is that we're sort of started to move forward in terms of this era, because the 80s represented a significant improvement in computing power. But really what we see is certainly the 2000s and most definitely the 2020s is that the attitude towards databases and so forth has really changed in society. And we're seeing that there's legislation that's been brought in. We're seeing that Australia's just appointed a privacy commissioner. There's the changes in the EU. And fundamentally, it's because we're aware of the heightened risks that comes with these sort of large-scale databases. So essentially, realistically, when we're looking at this database, this is where the topic of consent comes in. So you as an Australian, you have a right to obviously manage where your data is stored, and fundamentally, in order for somebody to collect or utilise that information, they need to have the appropriate consents in this space. If we were to apply this 1980s model to the current benchmark, given that we're talking about medical information and sensitive medical information, we're also talking about personally identifiable information when it comes to the doctor. Under the current standards, not only should we have express consent from each of the doctor, but really, if we were to apply the model that we apply to the current digital processes, we should have express consent from the doctor for everybody who's handling this information along the way. On top of that, we should have a process around informed consent for the patient. As a patient walking into a pharmacy, filling a script, you should have be made aware that de-identified data extracts are sold to third parties. And fundamentally, what this could do is give you an option to obviously opt out of this information. The other model that's been really interesting in terms of this is that when we look at the introduction of sort of modern slavery and current vendor formats, a lot of the policies that companies apply to themselves, they also expect of their vendors. This is an example of one company, and it's obviously saying that in situations where the data is obtained from someone else, it's their responsibility and their responsibility only. Certainly, I've been a vendor in the industry for close to 10 years, and the number of pieces that I've signed to say that I'll abide by the policies and so forth is quite incredible. So realistically, when we look at it, we've continued to evolve, and we're still sort of working on the 90s level targeted model. The challenge with this is it's gotten harder. So if we think about that targeted model where we were throwing that resource into it, the Purdue Pharma model was essentially based on a high frequency, but there was also a lot of good excuses to see the customers, which have been since deemed to be sort of unethical. So this brought in the introduction of the Sunshine Act, where a lot of the golf weekends, a lot of the inviting partners to meetings is no longer considered appropriate or ethical. So fundamentally, trying to execute this model is only getting harder. The other kind of two issues that have come up is really because there's the absence of this consent, where has this gone wrong? There's two incidents that have happened. One was in 2011 in the US, and one was in 2017 in Korea. In 2007 in the US, there was a cardiologist, and in an innocent conversation with the rep explained to the cardiologist that they were in fact a target. On inquiring why, when we sort of looked into it, the doctor's wife was actually a Democratic rep in Vermont, and Vermont went to introduce the Prescription Information Confidentiality Act. This went back and forth through appeals and so forth, and actually ended up in the Supreme Court. And fundamentally, the outcome, it was a famous case called IMS Health versus Sorrell, and the outcome of it was that IMS Health were protected from selling this information under the freedom of speech, and they argued that in fact they're actually a publisher, where they were publishing the information in this case. In Korea, the same thing kicked off. There was an application that was installed on the machines, and it was extracting data and sending it off. Once again, there was a situation where doctors became aware of it, and this actually resulted in criminal investigations where the officers of the Pharmacy Guild were raided, and then it sort of moved forward from there. So really where we're at now is obviously present day, and looking at the history. The question that we're really proposing today is, does this model work, and particularly when we go to apply it to a digital environment? If we look at all other industries, what the pipeline looks like is we start off with a lead. We then move it to an opportunity. They then become a customer. Everything going well, ultimately end up as an advocate. The challenge with the old model, there's a few of them. Firstly, when we've set up a profile and we've allocated our resources to it, prior to even having an interaction with the customer, there's a limitation around how accurate that can be. One of the other insights that came out of the previous webinar was that 50% of doctors have only started in the country in the last 2 years. So essentially, obviously, the information is going to be skewed. The big thing as well, and this is obviously where I'll hand over to Bryn, but what this does is it ignores 70 to 85% of the market. If we look at every other industry in the world, digital has enabled them to screen thousands of people really quickly, understand who's inquiring, and then base their pipeline and their adoption curves around this. Fundamentally, the old model of a target, resource, and profile isn't consistent with that strategy. So for me, what I'll do is I'll hand over to Bryn, who can talk through some of the options that are available in AusDoc.
Lots of things to pick through. So I suppose a couple of the interesting things as well, and I think when you talk about consent, one of the interesting things from our side of the fence was talking to doctors on staff. It wasn't even a question of consent. It was a question of understanding that that data was available about them. That wasn't something that they were aware of. They weren't aware as to why they were targets or why they were not targets. Just, people would come to see them or not see them, as the case may be. Which again, I think to your point around consent, about an opt-in culture, about, increase of things like GDPR coming out of the UK and Europe, I think is going to be a problem. I think it's going to come up pretty soon. And then I suppose, Liam, if you just want to flick to the next. So I suppose this is the, top of the funnel kind of, how do you let doctors identify themselves? How do you, to your point around how do you screen or how do you scan through a lot? We've got 60,000 opted in. So this is the important piece, members of the AusDoc platform and community, with 34,000 of those using the platform monthly. So that kind of, that reach, that appetite, that access is there. And then I'll just put a line in here about doctor-initiated leads. So this is, whether it's via some of the sample stuff we do with Liam, via fax, but also through our own platform, whether it's this kind of middle section here, which is about capturing the consent on our platform, tick box exercise by requesting this information, by asking to visit someone, by asking to attend, by looking to download, whatever that reciprocity is, whatever that exchange of information or value is. Explicitly pre-populated with all your information, because no one wants to have to go dig up their APRA number or whatever other sort of unique identifiers you've got. Tick box information. There's a paper trail and everything mapping all the way back to the client side. like the appetite's there. Doctors want information, and this is back to this kind of timely, you know, one of our doctors on staff had a comment about how to find out about new drugs. Find out about new drugs from reps, but it's a bit of a roll of dice. You know, who's going to come through the door next? And it wasn't that there wasn't a value exchange. The value exchange was huge, but it was just a question of going, at the time, Entresto was relatively new to market, and he was in a situation of going, yeah, I'm not going to initiate, but if someone came and asked me about Entresto, I don't know enough about it. I'd like to see a rep. But it was this kind of passive and sit back, you know, how do I wait for that exchange of information to happen? So increasingly, we're looking to say, well, how do you give the doctor the ability to reach out? And then again, you're back into this challenge of kind of target versus non-target. So again, Liam, I mean, sing up if it's the same with your side, but from our side, experience has shown around about 50% of leads don't get followed up. And, you know, with a view that they weren't a target, well, they're still ultimately the customer. And if a doctor's put their hand up, I mean, again, it reflects on us, it reflects on the service, but it also, you know, comes back to brand and ultimately making them the frontline customer. Is, you know, we're not necessarily talking about going and visiting someone at 8 towns outside of Albury. It might just be a phone call, or it might be an email, but it's something to go, you've got a doctor, you've got a prime, you know, frontline customer with a hand in the air. And that feels like, you know, in traditional kind of marketing territory, this is a, you know, it's an incredibly high lead score. So it's a question then about how do we better service the customer base?
And just to add to that, Bryn, I mean, the experience that we have of it is obviously from potentially the other side, where we might have a doctor that's set up their preferences on Rextro, and it might be once a month. And one of the conversations that I'm constantly having with reps, if there's 10 appointments available and there's 50 people that want to go in there, you're going to do well to get one for January next year. The fact that you need to see this doctor 8 times is not customer-centric. It's not, here's the doctor's preferences, this is what they've made available, and then going through from that. And to your point, so we've got doctors who have only allocated a small amount of time, but then as well, we've got a lot of doctors sitting out there asking for stuff, but essentially there's no response sort of received.
Yeah. So again, and I suppose that we don't go into it too much detail here, but again, you know, often the request from customer side is, how do I just talk to my targets, which is fine. We'd obviously, the view with something like this is you go, well, why just talk to? You know, the cost to access, the cost to target, is that, or the cost to reach, is that much lower? You know, you're talking double figure dollars for 1,000 ad units. There are ways to reach a larger population. And, you know, we either talk split targeting, so reinforce with targets and, you know, introduce new concepts with non-targets, and or let them self-define. You pretty quickly see that behavior, you know, effectively create dynamic cohorts as you go to go, well, which doctors are engaging more, which doctors are leaning in, which people are putting their hand up to request more information, and how do you want to treat them differently? Ultimately, you know, customer journey mapping is what do we want them to do? And obviously the end point ideally is, to your point, they become a customer, they become an advocate, you know, they become a script writer. But, you know, this is this kind of a little bit back to basics kind of, you know, marketing funnel 101. And I suppose if you don't mind just going next slide, Liam, I mean, this again was just this kind of the opportunity piece as much as anything. This is this kind of, you know, what's that engagement look like with us? I mean, again, take a pinch of salt, roughly 2/3 of all engagements are outside of working hours. So we know that when you are in, you know, doctors, time poor, busy people, high demand, you know, seeing patients, using platforms like Rextro to make the, you know, make their work life smoother, make that balance kind of that work better. But again, this is just this thing about how you either complementing what you're already doing with in-field force, or indeed supporting at times when you just can't access them, you know, outside of that time. And again, this is this piece around digital offers people the opportunity to access information outside of that 9 to 5. You know, the days of kind of going, that's my period, that's the only window I've got, Monday to Friday. You know, you look at some of the stats, it comes in at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I'm like, I've got no idea why a doctor was looking at Ausdoc at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning, but it happens. So again, I think we're all just at that, you know, digitally, as we live in an on-demand culture. It is about, I want the information, I want access to that information, time, place, and format that suits me. And that's where I think that we're in, you know, trying to help doctors be better doctors by giving them those sorts of opportunities to lean.
So look, as I say, that was really the content that we sort of thought was worthwhile sort of going over with everybody. I guess probably the takeaways are that an environment where we're sort of looking to get a lot of information about customers with different levels of consent and potentially sort of is potentially an exposure. Really in a world where it starts with a first interaction and then sort of building up from there into obviously a customer that's having a good customer experience and is a loyalist of the product and in particular the company is sort of what we see as the way to move forward. But look, what I'd like to do is obviously open it up to any questions or comments from those people. I can see that we've got a great audience here. If anybody's got any sort of thoughts or comments, really keen to kind of hear those questions. And maybe just whilst they're coming in, I guess bring probably just some of the stories to share. It has been sort of an interesting experience sort of working together over the last few years and sort of very different backgrounds and sort of coming from very different areas and really sort of just breaking down the model. I remember I was in your offices one day and one of the people sort of said, so you're saying that 85% of people don't matter? And I was like, yes, that's the philosophy.
Yeah.
And obviously from there, it's obviously gone.
No, agreed. And I think it's, digital publishing, and I'm sure, anyone working in a kind of omni-channel, multi-channel digital role, it's all about that consent. It's all about how do you improve that customer experience ultimately, and to kind of go, I don't know why an in-field, agent talks to me, but they don't talk to my mate. That kind of that understanding that pathway, I think is a huge gap. And yeah, it is. I think there's increasingly a responsibility to, we do have to. I think to your point, every time you've come in, you've told me another part of it, which has always opened my eyes. But this is a model that hasn't changed significantly in 60 years. So it's the same sort of question to go. Every other thing we do is different. Combank 10 years ago would have built a bank closer to my house to help me access it versus going online. And yet I don't know the last time I walked into a bank. So I just think it's that question around digital disruption is right, and it genuinely feels like whether it's too hard to move in pharma, but it feels like there's a big opportunity in true digital disruption.
No, absolutely. Look, one of the questions that's come in, and I feel like it's a bit of a blight on us not to have explained it properly,
Yep.
Rin, but fundamentally, what is the connection between Rextra and Ausdocs that can assist in obviously that lead generation component? Maybe I might have a crack at it first, Bryn, and then.
Sure.
But look, fundamentally, the great news is that we've built a series of APIs between the two platforms. So what this means is that on one side, Rextra, as I mentioned, has all of the customer preferences, but importantly as well, it's got all of the industry reps on there as well that are using it to book in with those customers on an ongoing basis. What the Rextra system can do, because it knows all the territories and so forth, is it can actually route an inquiry through the system to exactly the right person within a few minutes, which essentially, based on experience, is really critical, because what we see is that when people are following up inquiries quickly, the doctor goes, wow, I made an inquiry and fundamentally somebody's heard it, somebody's responded to it, these guys are on the ball. Maybe did I cover that off, Bryn? Or?
I think that's exactly it. Yeah, I mean the other option was batch spreadsheet email model. So yeah, anything that was about how do you make it work a bit smarter. You don't want to increase workflow for anyone in that. Someone sat there going, it's great, I'm getting 100 leads from Salesforce, but I've now got to go and allocate them. Versus, can you get to the right person? Can they get in contact with them in a timely and quick fashion? So yeah, that was exactly the principle.
Fantastic. And look, probably the only other thing, just to flow on, and there has been actually one other question that'll come in. That
I think again you can deal with this one on your CRM, Liam. This is right in your sweet spot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So look, great questions. The question is obviously, can we flow this through into different CRM systems? So look, absolutely. We have done existing integrations with most of the off-the-shelf, the Salesforces, the Zohos, and so forth. The end of this year, we just did 2 integrations with IQVIA's new OCE system. The one that we haven't done as yet is Viva, but really, if there's a customer out there that's keen to explore that, like any of these systems, they're all just big databases that information's sort of flowing back and forth between. It just takes the customer to ask for that, and then we can get that going. The final point that I just thought was worthwhile, and look, Brett and I have done a number of these sort of public events over the years and looked at different sort of models, and we've often talked about realestate.com as a broad screening tool. The real estate industry doesn't send people out knocking on doors, finding out who's looking to sell and so forth. They use the digital tool to screen millions and millions of people, and then obviously based on those inquiries coming in, are able to filter that off. The other one that I think is particularly relevant probably for today's conversation, when we're talking about moving them from an initial inquiry through to an advocate, is really when we look at the airlines and the frequent flyer programs that are around that. Qantas don't have a list of Virgin's Platinum frequent flyers and make 8 phone calls to them each year to try and get them to convert. They start off with their bronzes, and then they essentially drive that loyalty to a point where a lot of people are prepared to pay more in order to fly with the relevant airline. I think if we take those 2 industry examples and really try and apply them on a farmer scale, this is what I really see as the way forward and the way we can really take these digital initiatives way forward. Any final comments, Bryn?
No, I appreciate the everyone's attendance, and Liam, thank you for inviting me. I think it's a fascinating area. I think it's somewhere that's going to get. I think it's going to get a lot more exposure in the near future. I think it is a really important area for doctors to understand. And I think there's massive opportunities for the right people that want to explore it. You know, that's the beauty of kind of near as damn it real-time information coming back from Dig. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Liam, and thanks everyone attending.
Thank you, everybody.